You are listening to the Sacred Pathways podcast, stories and wisdom from walking the heart's way. I am your host and co-journer, Sydney Searchwell Simpson, and I am thrilled to walk this journey with you. Bismillah. Let us begin. Hi everyone, welcome to Sacred Pathways, where we share stories and wisdom from walking the heart's way. Today I'm very excited to be in conversation and connection with someone who I have been watching and connecting to their sacred work for years. We're here today with Ridhi de Cruz. Welcome. Thank you for being here. I want to know, how's your heart feeling today?
Ooh, it's a deep question. My heart's all over the place, I would say. There's so much going on in our world, and both locally and then globally. And so, some heaviness, some gratitude, some grief. And I'm sure there's so much more that I'm holding that I'm not in full attunement and awareness for.
Definitely. We celebrate and notice where we can be attuned because, I think that's very common. Lots of the people I speak with talk about that full range of spectrum. And I think that just shows and demonstrates we're whole human beings and quite complex. So today we're going to be talking about belonging as a pathway to freedom, to accountability and repair, to remembrance. And this is such a huge and important topic. And it's more than just a topic, like it's a way of being and relating. And it seems to me from, again, being in connection with your work, but then also from our conversation we had last week, your life really seems to be rooted and in conversation with belonging. And so I'm curious if you can share with us a story, if there's a singular story that initiated you into exploring this pathway of belonging in your life.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to pull the thread through, and I just remember one incident that kind of opened it up for me to be like, oh wow, this is really a big deal. It's important. I was working with a very small nonprofit, and part of our mission and work was to help people connect with the land and help people connect with each other. And I remember being like, there's something missing. I worked with them from 2012 till 2020 and was just noticing some patterns of how when the focus of connection is only outward, and I'm using these forms like as if we're separate from each other, but I think I do have an embodied version of me that also deserves some connection. And so it really came to me that, hey, like, if I'm connecting with land and if I'm connecting with other humans and if I'm not simultaneously connected with myself, something's off there. Like I felt like this outward connection, but not simultaneously maintaining an inward connection. And that felt really significant and profound. And I started wrapping that into our vocabulary to be like, no, we can't leave ourselves out of this. And I had other mirrors and reflections from sweet guides and mentors and friends of mine. Because, I would say in community organizing spaces, I see how we valorize burnout. And I was going through burnout, and it's a very extreme version of being disconnected from myself. But that was why I think that I was like, something's off. This doesn't feel balanced to me to just be connecting outside of me. And I had this beautiful reflection from a friend of mine who was like, Ridhi, we can't do liberatory work that doesn't include us. Like, that is actually not in attunement, not in alignment. of this knowing that we have, that we're all connected. And that was really tough for me to integrate. I really struggled. I was like, no, not for me, BIPOC spaces, but for other BIPOC people, not one liberatory spaces for other people, not one that includes me. And there's a lot caught up in it, right? There's people pleasing, there's saviorism, there's fixing, there's a lot of external validation orientedness that I was meeting in myself as barriers and blocks to understanding what I needed to be a part and to be with the circle of everything else and everyone else. And once I started to pull on some of those threads, I found some deep woundedness around not belonging. And I remember at one point, this was in I think a permaculture course, and I'd always find that the socio-cultural pieces wouldn't really get handled or, brought up. And so I was trying all these different ways, like socially, like the political structure, but then also from a very like personal pathway and trajectory to bring it up. And one day I was like, this feels really heavy because I've been working on it on my own, reflecting on it. And I brought it up in a room full of like strangers to me, definitely power dynamic. I'm a teacher. But I was like, okay, I'm just going to share. Like, I really struggle with belonging, and it's been challenging throughout my life, actually. You reflect, you're like, why placemaking? Like, why am I doing this work? And I was like, whoa. And I shared that in front of the room, and like not a single person in the room was unfamiliar with it. Everybody resonated. And I feel like at that moment, it cracked something open for me, because it felt like I had named something that we all kind of carry, but in the shadows, and everyone has a lot of shame and fear about bringing it up. I mean, this was like years ago, maybe a decade ago, right? That I was bringing it up, or like 8 years ago. And in that moment and the aftermath, the outpouring that came from people in terms of like, whoa, I'm so grateful that you named that. I had no idea that like someone like you, we always think like, oh, that person doesn't struggle with belonging. Like they seem really secure, and yet this is so universal. And it just revealed to me how important it is to be repairing that connection, repairing that relationship, to be in curiosity, like about other people, and not project like what I think about them and what their struggles are. And then to also, I think over time, it's helped me feel like, oh, this is not just mine. Like, this is universal, and it didn't just like, oh, okay, now I don't feel it anymore, because everybody feels it. But I think in that knowing that we're all in this struggle together, like one piece of that like loneliness or just that isolation melted away, because it didn't feel as heavy anymore, because I know that I'm not the only one holding this piece. And I would say that from that moment on, I've started to articulate it more as a practice of belonging, because I understood as there's so many different ingredients and pieces. It's not a linear process of just me like fixing it and then we're good to go. Done. Yeah. But rather like I would notice when I felt my connections were stronger, when they weren't. And then like I'd have certain practices, I'd fall off them. And that was okay. And then there was a lot of guilt and shame, like, oh, we were doing so good, and now we messed up, and now we're feeling disconnected again. And just to again alleviate that pressure for perfection and that it's static, but rather like enliven the sense of belonging that it takes breathing life into. It is a practice. And when I tend to land, when I give gratitude, like to land, with land, when I spend time in connection, like my sense of belonging is just, it's just dramatically different. And I'd also say like, that's something that I think is now finally getting more attention, at least on Turtle Island in our contemporary times. I'm sure it was just a way of life for folks before, but today I feel the awareness around somatics and like how our bodies are not just the container that we live our lives in, like, oh, okay, take this meat suit around, but that our bodies hold so much wisdom. And yeah, I think, it's like so simplistic to say connection to self, but where ecology is within ourselves. And to be able to move through life in a way that honors the language and the pacing of our bodies in their own right. Like, that's been another way for me to be like, I think my body's telling me something else, but I'm not listening.
Yeah.
Or like other parts of me are like, in different trajectories. And how do I make space for this intelligence, this way of knowing, this materiality that is literally does belong to this place, is of this place.
Totally.
That's a big piece. I give a couple of examples. I didn't grow up in Turtle Island. I grew up in India. And even though I'm from there, have encountered a lot of othering because I'm non-binary. I don't conform to some shapes that people sometimes feel very invested in about how one should be and how one should look and how one should behave and what job one should have and blah, blah, blah. And so I think since my teenage years, I remember people just viewing me as a foreigner, actually. Thinking like, you're not from India. To the point where I internalized some of those stories and I was like, maybe I'm Portuguese. The Portuguese came and colonized where my most recent ancestors are from. Went so far as to do a DNA test and then turned up like so South Indian. I was like, damn, okay. The science, the DNA science. I was like, whew, wow, okay.
Yeah.
Whoa. But yeah, always carried that like, why do you not see me as Indian? Like so many Indian people specifically, other folks would be like, oh, totally, you so look Indian, but my own people would not, so many times would be like, no way, Brazil, like Colombian, like.
Do you think it was because of behavior? What do you think it was that drove people to distinguish you are not us?
I think those behavior patterns, like in the sense that I love quietness and I've loved living alone. I've traveled, and I think there's a stereotype because there are so many people like me. By no means am I so strange that, like, you know what I mean? It's just,
I do.
There's a cultural trope, right, that can feel very maybe affirming to some, but I think can be incredibly not affirming to others, especially with non-dominant identities. And I grew up Christian, which some folks want to believe that India is full of Hindus, and it's not. Christianity is very old, and there's so many other religions in India. And so I didn't grow up with some of those place-based practices in its more dominant form in Hinduism, generalized form in Hinduism rather than the actual more hyperlocal place-based ways. It's just like become more uniform. And so I think part of it was that they were like, how do you not know about this? And I was like, because I'm not Hindu, and Hindu doesn't equal Indian. Also, I'm not a demure, like, Indian woman. I've always been very non-binary, very, like, wear clothes that, like, make me feel comfortable. And I think also my neurodiversity, where I just I try to think for myself. And so some folks couldn't relate to my thought streams, and they're just like, I don't expect it coming from someone from India, I guess. And I don't know, actually, this is all conjecture, because I was like, I don't know why you think this is so outlandish, because not only am I from this place, but like some of the thinking, some of the patterning, like I've encountered other people, so I'm not this like extinct species or anything. So I think that's part of it, was just me in my own deep way, trying to be true to myself, and then encountering a lot of like opinions of other folks about how that like was upsetting the quorum, or the like,
Mm.
oh, but this is not how we do that. And I was like, but why? Like, why can't it
Yeah.
be? Yeah. And I also remember there's this place in India. It's like this string of ancient hills now, where like mountains,
Hmm.
that hugs the southwestern coast, and it's called the Western Ghats, and it's just so magnificent. It's like my favorite place on the
Mm.
planet, even though I haven't been that many places. And that place feels like home to me in a very pre-language way. My
Right.
body, when I've listened to my body was like, "Yup, my bones want to be
No.
here." And I was like, oh, we're from here? Okay. And, the
Yeah.
DNA test validates that in a way, because I
Mm.
was like, I know I'm from here. I know
Mm.
this land. Like, my bones know this land because my bones are this land. My bones want to go
Mm.
back to this land. And
Mm.
so there's that level of belonging that I've just felt when I'm in certain places that
Mm.
I is difficult to articulate, other than my bones just know that they
Yeah.
belong. And then I'm like, oh, you cool. Okay, cool. I will integrate that here.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Ugh. I really appreciate you sharing this shift from witnessing the disconnect where it was a lot of like external based liberation
Yeah,
before coming to know that within and
yeah,
being able to then, like you said, in your body, and then from that point being able to integrate and interact with all of our relationships from that point of attunement of like this. I know what belonging feels like in my body. I know what connection feels like. I know what liberation feels like in my body. And to be able to then sort of gauge, I mean, you I had to first say, like, I really am so just grateful that we're having this conversation now. It's so timely, I think, just within my own life. I spent at least like 3 hours yesterday crying about the sense of disbelonging, and it was
yeah,
really good for me. I love
yes,
crying.
yeah.
You know,
So good.
my body knows that that's good for me,
Yes,
you know?
yeah,
And so much of it was about like accepting, oh, the more true I am to myself, the more and more in which I'm going to see that I do not belong within dominant structures that
yep,
it is expected that I
yep,
fit into.
yep,
And there's going to be grief and there's going to be
yep,
confusion, but there's also a sense of freedom when one can come to accept that and then be in conversation, be in relationship with others who have done the same for themselves.
yep.
And so I just have to say that. Like, I feel like that's very important.
It is.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. It's not easy, right? Like, I don't know, even now when I'm like, yep, been focusing on belonging, and so many years later, still it's a practice, and I struggle, and
Totally.
there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of pain
So
there.
much pain.
Yeah.
And I mean, that brings me into the next question. It's when I was listening to you to your previous answer, I was paying attention to like what severs us. And I mean, we're living in a great severance, and we
Yeah.
have been, and we've
Yeah.
built societies and institutions and
Yeah.
ways of relating that are
Yeah.
grounded in expanding and cementing these
Yeah.
severances, like within ourselves, between other humans, between us and other life forms, between the earth, life, like it goes on and on and on. And
Yeah.
I think about how, in understanding the literal necessity of life to be in relationship, honorable, conscious relationship with one another, I see what's unfolding in this world, and it's so clear to me that amongst all the many crises it is, it's also deeply a relational crisis. And I think belonging goes really into that, for how many years basically everyone on the planet, because of colonization, like we've all been culturally conditioned within racial hierarchy,
Yep.
caste hierarchies,
Yep.
capitalism. So we have inherited their values, and also like their way of measuring that can then say like, you know, even though you technically were born here, born in India, and I was born in India, you don't, because you don't measure up to a certain standard of what I think, that sort of training. And maybe you can speak a little bit about that, about the relational crisis and how you are practicing navigating that training into belonging in all of those ways within ourselves, outside of ourselves, with the earth, etc.
I think two things come up. One is that in my conversations with people here on Turtle Island, especially those who are not indigenous to this place, I feel like I've heard people be taken aback that someone who was born in a place, is from a place, could still have such a strong sense of disbelonging. And I think I want to highlight that for a moment, because those of us who come from like this notion of cultural purity, that there's intact cultures, at least from my stance, like there are very few uncontacted tribes, right? And they've
Yeah.
kind of been contacted. I trained as an anthropologist because I was like, when did this all go sideways? Like, where was that? I was looking for that moment, like, trace it back, and can we? And I didn't find like the answers I wanted, in the sense that I was like, when did oppression begin? Like, when did we
Right.
start? And I feel like I kept being shown this complicated reality that within us as humans, as living beings, we are the spectrum. So we hold so much potentiality for violence and aggression and wow. Yeah. And not just as humans. Also, sometimes I'm like, only humans can do that messed up thing. And then I'll go check in the animal world and be like, whoa, y'all are intense. So it's like, it lives, it's part of life. Like, and I'm not saying this to mean like, oh, then that's fine. We just got to live with it. But yeah, I think there's this just deep, deep pain, aggression, violence. And then there's also such benevolence and beauty and healing. So we're purveyors of both and everything in between. Yeah, so that was one piece of it. And because we are ecologies, or like just a mosaic of all of these things that are not necessarily coherent or like tied together, like with these multiplicities, yeah, I just felt like it was important to share that with people, to be like, no one's starting off right now from having it all together. I think that's, you know what I mean? I was like, we are all truly in this. Our journeys may be different and similar. And I remember I was listening to this one podcast with Rowan White, who's in Modoc, with Prentice Hemphill. And then I remember Rowan White saying something like, I'm in my homelands, I like grew up here, and like the cultural displacement and unbelonging that I feel is so strong. And that's when for me I was like, oh wow, you can even be on the same land. And it was just like, it's like, wait, indigenous folks, like that's an indigenous person claiming diaspora. I had also kind of had this vision like, oh, my people moved, we were displaced. Like, that's why I feel disconnected, because so much of my belonging is tied up with land. I was like, that's why we were displaced. And we are so connected with land, so I'm not diminishing that. And at the same time, what Rowan said just pierced through some of my own presumptions, that even if I had stayed in land and all this violence had happened to me, like there is still that disassociation that we needed maybe for survival, like we
Right.
needed to move. So that's something that comes up. The other piece I wanted to share is that for many years I felt really upset with my parents when I would ask for family stories, that I wasn't given much. And I kept thinking like, oh, they're withholding it from me because I'm too weird, and they feel ashamed, or they don't blah blah blah. I made all my like pain stories, just like my
Mm-hmm.
narratives wrapped around why I wasn't being given these stories. And then I kept asking, and there were like little threads that were like, wow, opened a lot for me. But it wasn't until my caste abolition work that I started to realize that, first of all, I don't come from a caste dominant background, at least in my current version, and it's layered. There's economic privilege that my family comes from in this, like in my parents' generation. But I don't, when I'm trying to understand the socioeconomic milieu of my grandparents' time, like it's really difficult for me to
Right.
attune to. But yeah, I think once I began to understand caste and how it operates more, I began to understand why we don't have ancestral land, why we don't know how our names are decrews, like, like we don't have, like I can't tell you where I'm from in terms of
Mm.
like there isn't that story. And there are a lot of Brahmin people that I know, like caste dominant people, who have like still have their ancestral temples dedicated to
Mm-hmm.
them and their ancestral land. And there's a lot of internalized shame, like maybe my people just were too, materialistic, or they like didn't care. And then with a caste analysis, I'm like, wow, my people were probably non-dominant caste and were fleeing caste oppression, which is why they converted into Christianity, didn't keep their names, followed economic progress because that was one way they could like come out of this hierarchy that they were forced into. And that's
Mm.
why I feel like, my parents were just like, you need to study, you need to be economically like,
Mm.
independent. And here I was with my anti-capitalist kind of like, oh, that sucks. Like, why are you making, I did, because
Yeah,
I didn't understand the context, right?
of
Like,
course. Yeah.
so all this disconnection has happened, right? The severance has happened. And yet, when I go to the Western Ghats, I just know. My body just knows.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really profound, because I know I have spent a lot of time grieving, and I will spend the rest of my life grieving all that has been interrupted, all that has been, I hesitate to say lost,
Mm.
because I was taught that by one of my other mentors, Judy Bluehost Skelton, who was just like, colonization didn't like steal or like, we didn't lose these things, they were interrupted.
Mm.
And I love that, because then it it makes me attuned to how those memories still live within me, right? They were
Right.
just interrupted. They're not lost. And so when I attune to the severance, like survival that my ancestors probably had to choose, giving up land, like moving, this, that, and the other, you
Mm.
know, I can come at it with a little more compassion and with a little more groundedness to hold their pain alongside mine,
Mm-hmm.
and not in a way like y'all made these messed up decisions and look what, like I'm alienated here,
Yeah.
because there's some of that like hurt at them, like why
Yeah.
did you, I don't even know what my name like. And now it is the cruise, and I accept that. But yeah, I feel like I hold less onto that kind of handed down story, and like more forgiveness and more acceptance. I'm like, oh, I feel into what they must have gone through, which I cannot imagine. And
Right.
then I come from a more resourced place to be like, it's okay, because I will remember for
Yeah.
us.
Exactly.
I can remember for us, because maybe you couldn't. You weren't
Mm-hmm.
allowed. It was too dangerous.
Risky. Yeah.
Yeah. And like they have given us, I feel all of us, we all have it in us, like literally,
Right.
scientifically, right? It's been proven the minerals are in our bones, they're in our blood,
Completely.
like, so just feeling into that, tuning into that. And I think not letting my pain guide me, like not
Mm.
be at the forefront, like not, but also not gaslighting myself to be like there's no pain here. But like
Mm.
I think truly orienting towards liberation. There's this caste abolitionist, amazing Dalit American person called Tenmuri Soundarajan. who wrote a book called The Trauma of Caste. And in that book, there's a chapter, I think, called The Wisdom of the Wound, or From Wounding to Wisdom,
Yeah.
and how that wisdom really comes through the wounding, not around, not under, not
Yes.
like it's so. I feel like when I attune to the severances, the pain is my map to the practice of belonging.
Completely. Completely. Wow, I'm like just integrating everything that you shared, and I think that there can be so much resonance with the trying to go back, which is impossible, which I think is a really hard thing for folks
Yeah.
who embark on a path of trying to reconnect with their ancestry,
Yeah.
where it's like, even if we could go back, we might not like, and it might not be fully relevant, all that we see. But it's because we see so much of its opposite. We're trying to really hold on to, like, there must have been something before, but like you said, oppression and domination has just been present and changed faces
Yep.
since the beginning of our time,
Yeah.
you know,
Yep.
on this planet. And that
Yep.
does not mean that in any way, shape, or form to disregard your ancestry. There's so much wisdom.
Yep.
There's so much wisdom, but what's important too is, like, how do we bring that wisdom into today's context and allow us
Yes.
to navigate, like, what is present here right now. And I remember there was a circumstance I had a few years ago when I first began to reconnect with my own ancestry, because as a person from the Black diaspora, there's just a severance that can't I'll never know at the end of
Yeah.
the day,
Yep.
where my ancestors came before they went to Jamaica. Like, I know that's where my family is from, but before that, there's a whole history that's
Yeah.
gone. And I
Yeah.
remember, yes, going through lots of grief of just, like, like, how do I hold all of this, and
Yeah.
feeling, a sense of, like, there's a yearning for something, and I feel like I'll never get it. But it's fascinating because I had a moment where I realized in a meditation there can never be a complete total severance. They might have been able to sever from the land, from rituals and customs,
Yep.
language, etc.
Yep.
But when I think about body connection, they can't take away that sense of remembrance that happens here. Or when, I visit the land of my ancestors, that's something that nothing can, and there's something really empowering about that,
Yep.
about, okay, it's inherent. And I love what you said too about how you said, like, yeah, the minerals are in our bones, like, we are made of it. And what I love about that is that also reminds me that every single human being is indigenous to this earth. Like, you
Yep.
can't, and like,
Yep.
you can't not be. And what's happened now is that the practices that develops that allowed our species
Yeah.
to continue and to be in relationship, that's where the severance comes. And so I see more and more people now sort of, like, going back to their, like, as far as they can, their homelands, to try to remember how to listen to the earth,
Yeah.
how to grow food in relationship with earth, how to build homes, like, how to be, yeah, how to belong to one another
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
And I think that it's such a beautiful thing to see.
Yeah.
And that is the repair. I would love for us to dive into repair. The last time we spoke, you said belonging is instrumental for accountability and repair. And I would just love if you could speak a little bit more about that, because that's so huge. Because we were in the severance, and I think we're trying to figure out,
Yeah.
what do we do?
What am I doing? Yeah.
What do I do?
The thread that I'll pick up on is that in my practice of accountability and repair, like, I have found that when I'm more centered, when I'm feeling more into my belonging, it's just so much easier to have spaciousness. I feel like sometimes, especially with cancel culture and carceral politics, and how I mean, it's just that's part of the severance, right?
It
And
is.
again, no blame and shame. Like, it's incredibly difficult to navigate. our current lives and systems while these things are happening in an abolitionist liberatory way. It's incredibly difficult. There aren't enough supports. Like,
We're learning.
yeah, we're all just
We're learning.
making a lot of mistakes. It's what we're doing, which is okay. I mean, that's just life. And yeah, and I know like when my unbelonging is being triggered, right? Like when I'm feeling that exclusion, I'm feeling like that deep othering, and it's hard to like, sometimes I have felt like my child self, like in some of the group dynamics and conflicts that I have been a part of. And then what has happened and the way I show up has been that little kid who was bullied or whatever happened. That's what I mean by the trauma leading.
Yes.
And that doesn't go well. And usually, and it has, fractured relationships that I really care about, have regret for, and like I'm grieving and trying to like learn from and do better. In one of these conflicts that I'm thinking about in particular, when I tended to some of those deeper parts of me that were feeling excluded, I was just able to show up so differently. It pointed out to me in so many different ways the cost of inauthenticity, right? Like when we're letting certain traumas lead, certain stories are in the front, and then we're not our deeper, more fuller self, and the wisdom's not coming through. I think about my fawn response, for example, and how difficult it is for me. It has been and continues to be for me to say certain things in certain groups, like in our BIPOC groups, for example. You know, like balancing respect and honoring what Black and Indigenous folks have been through as like very specific to this land. And then at what point does that become like a unhelpful deference that isn't authentic to what I'm experiencing and it just isn't authentic to me? There's another mentor friend of mine, Christine Bruno. I'm just going to name them because so much of what who I am is I'm a relational being. So they're like the people and the places that have informed and taught me things. And I remember Christine multiple times she would say, don't, not in relation to me, but about something else we would be discussing about like Indigenous organizing and like some kind of, whatever was happening. And she would be like, don't walk in front of us, don't walk behind us, walk by my side. And I remember the first time I heard that and I was like, no, y'all should walk in front. Like, this is an Indigenous space. Like, I'm not Indigenous to this place. And, I don't feel like I should, like, I was just trying to figure out, like, what is my place here, right? And then I'd keep getting this teaching from her in a particular way. And I know it's complicated and you can't take it out of context. So I just want to put that caveat. But I think now, like these past couple of years, I've been integrating this lesson. Say I'm in a space and I'm in the most marginalized, kind of identity. I don't want people just deferring to me because I'm brown skinned or, like I that's not what I think allyship and accomplice, that's not the witness that I want. And that felt like really uncomfortable. Oh, I wonder how many times people have just been like, disagree, but like, don't wanna get cancelled or don't wanna like, don't wanna just like they know better. And again, there's a tension there because I do think we've been silenced and suppressed and been talked over and gaslit. And so there is a way in which our voices need to be amplified. So it's a tricky territory I'm trying to speak to. But yeah, I think I can say for myself, there has been a woundedness that has led the way that I defer to other people to lead. That has not caused liberatory spaces. Like that's not been the outcome. It has led to stress and strain because something, it hasn't felt like a co-held container that includes liberation for all. Because intersectionality and like we're all coming from such different nets of belonging and unbelonging. And so we can get really tangled up with each other when there's not that spaciousness that we give and allow ourselves to be in, to really like, disentangle from the hooks of our woundedness and make a
Yeah.
truly inclusive net that holds us all.
And doesn't require us to be in this constant shifting of power because it's imbalance. It's just imbalance, but it's like actually we're in our power together.
Yeah.
And it becomes less about a specific identity formed through a traumatic engagement and becomes a whole lot more about what do you have to offer as an integral part of our community.
Right.
And I think that that's, it's complex. And I think we just have to allow that, We have to allow the fact that as we're trying to find new ways of relating that are liberatory, as we are sitting with our training and our attempts to move from the training, all of those are going to exist in the same space. I hope and pray that more of us can build our capacity to hold complexity and to practice compassion and grace as we move through it, because otherwise, what are we practicing? We're practicing the punishment and the shame and the things that have solidified us into this thing. So it requires, like you mentioned in your own practice and experience, awareness and sort of like slowing down and feeling through, does this feel, truly liberating, or is it like a sort of like a giving away of power, the deference? It's interesting because I've been in that situation too, where I've been like, maybe I shouldn't be speaking about specific land issues that are happening here in Canada because I'm not Indigenous to the place. And then I'm so grateful now that quickly, like, that's not even a common thought anymore, but I'm aware of, no, is that authentic? The answer is no. Two, we're here now. Like, no matter how it is that we got on Turtle Island, we are here now. And we need to figure out how to not even deal with that. I don't want to deal with it. I want to figure out how to love the fact that we're together and how we can witness the magic of making that intentional where before it wasn't intentional.
Yeah. Can I share a little bit on that thread? Yeah, because I do think it's important. Like, I don't want people to walk away from this conversation and be like, oh, dang, I need to go to my homelands and like listen to my bones, or, just like it's going to be different for each person. And you're so right. Like, we are here, right? We are here now. And I think my hope is that as we grieve and tend to the woundedness of being in diaspora, right? That we are all people of diaspora, like that's something that I've been coming to terms with, that we do also have a responsibility. Like, the practice of belonging, there is a feeling of responsibility, because I feel like all our relations depend on that.
Yeah.
That we turn to them, we turn to each other, we turn to ourselves to tend those relationships, because it isn't just about allegiance to a particular place or a particular people, but to recognizing that wherever we are, and it's a way of life, right? It is super important to just begin wherever we are and see what that offers, because there is clearly some reason, there's some medicine that will always be available wherever we are. And we don't need to like go, I mean, and I do this, so I'm laughing because I'm like, I love backpacking, and I'm like, oh, there's not distraction, and like, I need to feel it. And so we have our practices, or we have our pathways to how we engage that more deeply. And sometimes it's like the dose is strong. Sometimes it's like, oh, I'm in a park, or I'm in a parking lot and there's like a little dandelion, or, whatever it is, there's always connection available to us, right? In every moment. We have a birthright to belong because we are of this place. Just living into that, practicing it, cultivating it, affirming it, finding the people, places, and things that affirm that. It's like, what seeds are we watering, right? And And of course, that doesn't mean we don't look at the devastation of, say, a landslide or some other disruptive event that's happened. And I feel like that impetus, that impulse to heal is just, it's like anytime I look at land, right? It's always there. Land is always repairing itself, or like, it's like, oh, this happened. Well, what seeds can grow from here now? Like, this big
Yeah.
tree got cut, and like life continues somehow. And so it's just really been such a joy to find like, okay, now we're here. And so what's possible? What seeds can be watered? What's possible to grow from here?
Absolutely.
There's a Buddhist teaching about the two arrows, right? Like
Can you share it
where,
with us?
yeah, and I'm not a Dharma teacher, but I will say like I've gained a lot from this. Basically, like, there's the first arrow that comes is the suffering, right? Like, or the bad event, something racist, something xenophobic, whatever it is, like the first arrow hits us. And that's not to say that that was not a very harmful thing. It's like needs to be tended. And I think I noticed this in myself, where a lot more suffering comes from the second arrow, which is like, why was I hit? Like, why is this arrow in me? Like the suffering, not about the arrow itself, but the second arrow of suffering, of questioning it, and like, just
Trying
unpacking.
to find a narrative.
Yeah, and then all of our trauma will fill that story, right? Like, and what I've seen in myself is that there's just a lot of resistance to accepting where I am in the present moment. Lot of resistance because there's a lot of suffering and it's unfair. And I'm like, this sucks. I'm again not blaming and shaming. Like it's all just part of the process. And then sometimes if you're like distracted on the second arrow, you won't notice like, wait a second, the first arrow's gone septic and all this other stuff is happening, like, because we're not tending to that wound. So yeah, just to be like, okay, this is where I am now. And I do need to sort through my feelings about how messed up that is. And also, I do need to tend to this wound because it has hit me. I try to allay or like, tend to my wounding around like, why, how is it that I'm from a place, grew up there for my formative years. My first 28 years were in India before I ever came to Turtle Island. Why is it that my own people don't recognize me? It's been a hard question to sit with. And at the same time, I don't want to live only in that inquiry. And I also want to water the seeds of like, wow, cool. Like after all of these experiences, my bones still know that they want to be in the Western Ghats. And at the same time, like the levels of belonging that I've been able to cultivate, like this entire focal point of belonging all happened on Turtle Island. It didn't happen in India. Like I needed to be away from my cultural context, experience building community from scratch. I knew no one in Portland, right? And really tug at these pieces, meet parts and places in myself that I didn't know exist. And go through the immigration process, which is a very terrifying experience, especially right now. There's so much going on. And yet there's also, I think, with belonging comes a trusting in the path. And I always ask permission when I fly back from India to Turtle Island. I ask permission from the land. And the sense of belonging I feel here, even though I've only been here now 15 years, it's quite profound. I never knew I would have places I felt at home with on two continents. That's wild to me. I was like, wait, there's multiple homes?
Right.
And home, again, not being this perfect, coherent, so many parts. Like I ran into someone yesterday with like American flag who was like trying, like all of these instances, they're not complete, but nothing is, we don't want it to be static, right? It's living, it's dynamic, it's in motion. And I really feel into how much we are relational beings. And so when I come back here, all of my friendships, my connections, the memories that are locked up in places, like, all of it like starts to animate because I'm moving my physical body back here. And so anyway, there's just really magical moments and ways in which I feel like we are so much more connected than we want to believe, have tools to understand. And like I feel like there's a lot of fear. I know for me, I really fear the power that resides in me more than anything else because we are incredibly powerful beings,
Right. That's
you
so
know?
real.
Because, yeah,
If all you've known for most of your life, and maybe even too ancestrally, is a lot of disempowerment,
yeah,
your power, your true power, not this like power over
right,
domination power, but your true power can feel so unsettling. And I
yeah,
think it's because it requires more of us, like of us, authentic us,
yeah,
and we still do exist in paradigms in a larger, space that
yeah,
is like, no, no, you, so yeah,
yeah,
it's real.
yeah,
And
and
I think that's the practice of belonging, learning how to,
yeah.
yeah,
They've tried to beat it out of us, killed
yeah,
us for it, because empire knows where power resides. There's
yeah,
a reason that the people who worked with plants were targeted, are
hmm,
targeted. There's a reason that, they go for spirituality. It's all the mechanics of empire, of domination, are as age old as our tools for dismantling them.
yeah,
They exist together.
yeah,
They're the they are a continuum, and
hmm,
just like we are, of like which seeds we're trying to water, which parts of ourselves are expressing and leading. So
right,
yeah, yeah, you can't. I don't feel like I can cultivate belonging without tending to unbelonging.
yeah. And
It's
I
the same
appreciate that
thing.
they're in relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that sense of whenever we try to separate, it's important the moment we become aware of it just to pause and be like, okay. I think a lot about, conscious relationship. Like you said, there are so many more ways that we can name that we're all related to one another
Yeah.
and not just humans.
Yeah.
Life is literally a web
Yeah.
dependent and reliant on relationship, and we can be in unconscious relationship with that web, and I think a lot of that is what's been happening. Um, and we can also be in conscious relationship. And I think that that's when we have to engage with like the whole of like witnessing when we're in relationship with each other or when we're in liberatory spaces. When does the urge within me to want to dominate
Yeah.
and respond from that training, like when does that show up? And like you
Yeah.
said, not to shame it, not to blame myself, not to punish myself, but to see it and then make a choice, from hopefully an expanded, and that choice itself will sort of expand your understanding of what's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to be supported, right? If you can't
Yeah.
see it, to have those trusted friends
Yeah.
and mirrors like that, whether it's from land who's like, I don't know. Like, you get the nudges and I'm like, oh, dang, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that we don't feel like it's only our individuated responsibility, but like that belonging is also like in relationship with others, that we find
Completely.
that and rely on that, and that we can rely on it, on other people to help, like plant people, human people, like all the peoples to help us reconstitute, rethread those bits of ourselves.
Completely. Um, I have a closing question. Um, maybe two. One is just, you know, how do you feel belonging in your body? Like, how do you really feel, whether you're with the land or what is the name of the mountain that you live,
Western Ghats.
Western Ghats?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very.
How do you know in your body?
Oof, that is a very good question. I think one way, I don't know if it's always the same, because sometimes it's sparked in different ways, but there's a way in which I feel myself, like uh, my awareness or like my spirit, me, this version of me. I feel it really
Mm.
focused and strong. Like there's a breadth and width to it,
Mm.
and at the same time, like it's not just residing in my material body. It's like extending out, and I feel deeply connected with the place that I'm in. That's when I felt the most rooted, where it's like the embodied version of being connected with myself and being connected with others, right? Others, but not in a way. Sometimes, like, I will feel like, oh, I'm really connected. I'm listening to this person. They're having a hard time. And then someone will be like, where are you, Ridhi? And I'll be like, huh? And then I feel like, oh, I'm outside my body,
Mm.
actually, because I'm so focused on this other person. And when
Mm.
I'm like in my own belonging and rootedness, I feel like I'm very present in my body. And
Mm.
yet my sense of self extends
Yes.
and expands to a sense of self, nested systems wise, includes where I am. And it's like,
Mm.
now I'm thinking about it, I'm trying to like get into that mode. And it's like, I don't know. It's also like the stuff behind that is not seen also
Mm.
through eyes, like that sensation of like knowing and seeing without one's eyes.
Yes.
And I'll often, will get affirmations from land. So that's always like a sweet confirmation point where I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I really, really felt held by the land here.
Mm.
That's been such a gift, and that's where I feel like when we're tending relations, those relations tend us back. They're like, cool, you're here, you're
Yeah.
doing this thing with me. I'll respond.
Yeah.
This is real. Like it's
It
not
is.
just one sided. That reciprocity is actual
Mm-hmm.
reciprocity, and you
Mm-hmm.
will feel it back.
Mm-hmm.
And I do feel it back. Like, you know, yeah, I have felt it back because I've invested and cultivated things. I have quite a bit of like chronic pain and things in my body. And so I think also like belonging brings with that expanded sense of self. I think I feel literal spaciousness also. Like there's a ease that brings somehow.
Mm.
Sometimes I don't know the aches are there until they're not aching.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that.
Hmm.
And I guess honestly, just, I mean, you've already offered so much. There are just so many gems that come from your sincerity to practice that have just been shared in this conversation. But, if you wish to share for the listeners, any, final but really beginning guidance or expanding guidance for how to begin to be in conscious relationship with belonging, within oneself, with the earth, with each other. And I love what you shared around feeling that here, that sense of belonging and sense of self and spaciousness here, and seeing that expand in my body. I'm like, yes, that's what it is, because the words are hard. So I
Yeah.
wanted to name that. It was such a beautiful and true explanation. So any final closing words of
Mm.
you?
Yeah. I think one thing I want to point to is that each person's journey is just going to be their journey, like in terms of it's going to be unique. I might describe it one way, I might feel connection with land in this particular way, and the entry points or like the signposts, the practices, the map might be very different for
Mm.
somebody else. And I think it's really been an important practice for me to notice when I'm like, oh, I want that, what that person
Yeah.
has, right? Like,
Right.
and that's okay. That's natural.
Mhm.
I'm not Buddhist, but I benefit a lot from some of the teachings because my mind works in stories.
Mm.
And there's this teaching, I think, on how when you're walking your path, you're walking through a forest, and you're always focused on, like, oh, I want to get to that point. And then the trees around you, the beings around you are like, oh, well,
Yeah. Okay.
you're
Yeah.
you want to go see that thing, not us.
Right.
And again, it's not to come from shame and blame. Like, it's
Mm-mm.
very, very natural. Like, we're looking forward to something.
Mhm.
But I think something that I'm really trying to slow down to is like, where am I now? And who's
Mm.
here with me? And what can I really honor and celebrate and deepen into? Because that's worthy and important as well. And it helps me
Mm.
feel just more present in this moment. And sometime I'm going to reach that thing, maybe. Maybe not. I don't know. I might decide to go down a different, like, little trail. But just again, that presence, like that multi dimensional presence that it takes to
Mm.
really acknowledge, accept where we are. I feel like that, like, when people would be like, presence, presence, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is very challenging to be in presence with all that there is, and it's very layered. Like,
Mhm.
so yeah, in terms of like different people's practice of belonging, and your path is sacred and unique, and it's
Mhm.
only yours. There are
Yeah.
guides that will help, will walk alongside, and all of that, but it is that person. It's your path, and it's going to look different. And when we compare, we're like, that person didn't have like this
Yeah.
thing, that bog wasn't there, like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and then I think that's caused me a lot of suffering to compare. Like, how come I only found out about this and when I was in later on in life, and I wish I had had blah blah, And I
Mm.
think it's okay to be like, we wanted to walk that path, but it's not our path.
Yeah.
And that knowing of like, yes, I can grieve that I didn't get to see the wildflower meadow
Mhm.
at this point,
Right.
and also like these fourth ones are amazing. That practice of gratitude with where I am and what my path actually is, and loving the path, and I feel like the path will love you back.
Mhm.
Um, and then the other piece that feels very relevant is that no matter what, belonging is something, while it's shaped and composed of relationship, there's a part of that belonging in the like web of belongingness with all of life, that is ours and ours alone, and nobody gets to question that root, because we are indigenous to this place, and I was taught that as well. I just also want to say that for those who don't feel that that's accessible, nothing is for everyone, and some folks do feel like they weren't meant to be here. There are tools that are happening that allow for people to leave, leave when they want to because they're done with this earth realm.
Mhm.
And that too is rooted in agency, to be like, this is
Mhm.
something that we get to decide and work with and choose and cultivate and practice, however, whatever that is for us. I don't want to exclude or isolate and romanticize a practice of belonging that's felt accessible to me when it might be very, very different for somebody else.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, just honoring that authenticity that lives within you, and um, yeah, getting the support that we need to be who we are and who we need to be. It's my wish and prayer for everyone.
Mm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And maybe remember that that's enough.
So enough. I mean,
Yeah.
at base level, we're enough. I'm
Uh-huh.
just like, oh my gosh, all these systems,
Yeah.
all of this messaging about how we got to do X, Y, Z, be X, Y, Z. And I think, yeah, you're so right. Like, we're here,
Yeah.
we're not. Like, we passed on, we were enough, and we still are enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, unquestionable. I just wonder, and this is me projecting, but I'm like, do you think the cedar tree is like, oh, I'm not cedar enough? I'm like,
Yeah,
what is, why?
you
I mean, I know
know,
why. I know why.
yeah,
Domination, but
yeah. The cedar hasn't been trained by colonialism in white supremacy.
you know,
Yeah,
Robin's like, I don't
yeah,
know. My like, am I orange enough? Am I Robin enough? Like,
yeah,
I'm just like,
yeah, yeah. Or even
please.
questioning their path. They're there, they're here, and they're existing, and from that point, they are fulfilling the reciprocal relationship
Yeah,
that they're a part of. And I think that that's why there's so much beauty when we can, if that is our path, cultivate intentional relationship with the land in our ecosystem. It's amazing the wisdom that that relationship allows us to remember, that just sits in us.
it's wild.
Yeah, yeah.
It is, yeah, it has been kind of shocking to me. You know, I know Portland has that effect on people. People are like,
Mm,
oh, you're pretty woo or whatever, like these names that we put on it. And I'm like, no, actually, these are kind of our ancestral practices that have been,
yeah.
the other thing is we've been in more direct connection, I will say, with land for longer than we've not been. All of this
Yes.
BS is like, the
It's
last what?
new
It's so new.
in
I'm just
our
like, all this.
evolution. Yeah, and I think that's amazing because it's like when we when we feel into severance and the disconnect, like that's communicating that, we did not evolve in this way,
Yeah.
And so yeah, there's something there to remember, like this is quite literally our legacy. It's
Yeah.
quite literally our legacy. And so,
Yeah, and things change all the time. Everything is changing.
that's
Change
life.
is the only thing that is
Yeah.
dependably going to happen.
Yeah.
and and so this too will change. We don't know how, but yeah.
But we're here and we
Here
have to
now.
be here with one another and navigate it
Yeah.
together with,
Yeah.
yeah, with an openness to each other.
Yeah, and I think maybe like another thing I'll say is like I have really for most of my life actually questioned. I was like, I don't belong to this time because there's belonging to place, there's belonging
Yes.
to like, blood family, and then there's belonging to time. And I was just like, y'all, I'm no. Can you take me somewhere else? Like, I don't want to be
No.
in this. What the hell?
Did I
Uh,
really choose
yeah.
this?
I'm like, I didn't choose this. No, I messed up. Can take it back.
Yeah.
Long time. And sometimes I'm still like, I still don't know. But it's that practice of presence where I'm like, well, I guess I'm here now. I might have took the wrong train or whatever. Like, it's not been as helpful to like keep focusing only on that.
Mm,
Um, and while I am here, I'm like, what is possible and what is being asked? Who am I in this moment?
right.
And what do I feel called to? And because sometimes, people would be like, with our climate chaos and polycrises and all of this stuff. And I would like to think that immaterial of the time, that this would be my path somehow, of belonging, of loving land, of
Yeah.
practicing with each other. And I mean, I think all of these crises have definitely helped a lot, like in terms of, I mean, helped, like, like urged
They've
me to be
had their
like,
role. They've had their role.
yeah. And I also just like was shaped by environment, but I haven't wanted to focus on that. Like, this is the direct response to that. I'm like, these conditions are happening also when you look at historical texts. There have been disaster, famine, like oppression, war, all this stuff has been, this is our human story since as long as we've been writing stories, I think, and being human in one form or another. And so the way is the way. It's just, how we are responding to what is and how we really take that to heart.
Right.
So I've
Yeah.
gotten a little less frustrated with being here in this moment.
Mm,
Because it's that second arrow sometimes for me. I'm like, I don't want
totally.
to be here, I don't want to be here. And then that causes a lot of suffering. And so
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm here. I'm like, how do I have less suffering? The suffering is everywhere. It's so much, it's overpowering. And while suffering is part of life, I also so strongly believe that joy and ease is also a part of
Hmm.
life. And so I'm trying to cultivate those aspects of myself so that there's like more of a spectrum and it's not just the suffering. Like,
Yes.
my 5 Scorpio placements, I told you, like,
I must.
go to the pain, go to the pain, go to the pain, like
Yeah.
dig
Yeah.
it up. What is it? What is it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
sometimes I'm just like, well, you gotta let it rest also. Like
Hmm.
we've been doing too much and you can overwork and exhaust and
Yeah.
deplete soil in that way. And like there's like only so much I think our human spirits can metabolize at one time,
Mm.
you
We're
know?
metabolizing a lot. We're
We are.
metabolizing a lot. And I
Yeah.
think that choice is also how you honor life. You honor life in the protection and the fighting for the disconnect that we're seeing in life. And we also honor life by being present with life and
Yeah.
experiencing life and loving life and
Yeah.
like it's allowed.
Yeah. It is. I
It's
mean, I
needed.
think it's necessary, and I think
Hmm.
that's been another thing when I look at groups who are suffering unimaginable
Yeah.
things. Like they reach for certain things. They reach for their
Yeah.
music, they reach for their food, they
Yeah.
celebrate life because otherwise suffering can and will devour us. And then
Hmm.
I think that's what feeds the pain body, our personal and collective pain bodies, and then that will lead us more down that path of pain. And
Right.
so, like you were saying, that choosing, first of all, understanding we are at choice. I think that's, and that it isn't just being done unto us. Like,
Hmm.
how do we kind of, any threads we can just take back to us to be like, this is my agency. This is where
Yeah.
I get to have a choice, despite all
Mm.
the ways in which these systems confine, define, and shape us, like that we are also co defining and co shaping and
Yeah.
resisting and living. So, yeah, that we find where our choice points are and then choose well, choose wisely.
Yes. Thank you so much for such a nourishing conversation that is, I'm going to be carrying with me to be
Yeah.
like, yeah, how to be here and how to move forward being here, and what it is to belong and prioritizing that. So thank you, Ridhi. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I'm really grateful to have had this conversation.
Same. Thank you, Sydney. Like this beautiful offering that you have, and yeah, for inviting me into this space. It's just, it's very special. Like each moment is so precious, right? Like
Mm,
we don't know what's coming down the path for us. And
yeah.
yeah, I feel like the pandemic has really brought that home to me that the next moment is not guaranteed. And so,
Yes.
how do I show up for this one? And so, I'm really just truly honored and grateful to have spent this time with you and
Mm,
yeah, to hear you reflect back and hear parts of your journey as well and
mm.
what parts resonate. And yeah, it's such a trip.
Yeah. That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
Clearly. Oh,
Yeah, thank
yeah.
you.
Oh, gorgeous people. Yeah, you'll have all of the information for how to connect with Ridi intentionally, consciously, because you're already connected to them. But yeah, we'll close. We'll close. If you are interested in sharing your heart path story, art, or in sharing a paradigm-shifting conversation on the podcast, you can find the application in the show notes or the description bar. There you will also find links to join our community on Substack, where I share personal and emergent audios related to the episode themes and my personal process of living and being another way. Come engage and connect with other listeners and co-journers in the gatherings and conversations held only on Substack. You can also find the link to my website, Jivan Mukta Healing, to learn more about the work that I do to be of service to the world at this time. Until then, I wish you and your beloveds peace and presence on the path and journey. Connect soon. Thank you for listening to Sacred Pathways, stories and wisdom from walking the heart's way. As a budding show, I would be incredibly grateful if you supported this podcast by giving us a rating, sharing this or any other episode with your loved ones in person and online, and letting me know in the comment section below how this episode resonated with you. Engagement is lovingly received and appreciated if you have received value from this. See you next time.